Live.
Yahoo! When I say, okay, now this sounds funny that I'm going to open the show with Yahoo! But I am, for a multitude of reasons. I always say that, but a lot of people, when they say a multitude of reasons, they really don't have a multitude of reasons. They don't even have one reason. They just, it's one of those things like, hi, how are you? And then the other person says, fine, how are you? And nobody's listening to the other one. Sometimes I make up stuff when people say, hi, how are you? I say, well, I'm totally fine, except I have this small weird blister by my anus. And you know what? They never ask me anything. They just keep talking because they're not listening. They're not listening to me or to themselves. We fall into these patterns and these ruts of communication. And one of the things that COVID has done for me, which by the way, I'm just going to put it out there, and some of you will be sucking jelly sickles, but COVID has done me no harm. It's done me no harm. And I'm going to tell you why. And I'm going to tilt the camera a little bit because I feel like I need to be closer to you. And because I've had really hard things happen in my life. And I don't usually talk about my personal life, but I've had a lot of people on my 330 ask me a lot of personal questions. And I keep saying, well, if you'll subscribe to my YouTube channel and you'll listen to, my live stream, blah, blah, blah. Like I need bait, like clickbait, like, remember them on TMZ. No, it's not like that. If you're joining me on Saturday night, it's because we have a relationship in some way. We have an energetic relationship that crosses boundaries and space and time. So I want to talk to you about energy. I want to talk about movement. I want to talk about momentum. I want to talk about getting stuck. I want to talk about pivoting. I want to talk about praying. I want to talk about if you can't pray, to have the courage to what I call soar, which is send out a request, which is sort of the baby step. That's the bunny hill of really feeling confident that you can ask for something, and then going even one step further and believing that you deserve to receive it. So I can't promise you that I won't tear up or laugh very, very hard, or both. But I will promise you that if you stick around with me for however long this show goes, and I try to do an hour, but last night was my first live performance since March 13th, and it was a performance. Like I had to drive all the way. Thursday night, I had to have a friend drive me. I'm still not allowed to drive to Thousand Oaks, and I performed on a tennis court, and it was I don't want to say arduous, but I hadn't been out much. It was only 1 month since my surgery, and I don't keep going back to that. But even though it was positive, it was really kind of the equivalent of a double mastectomy. Like I had my breast cut open and my nippies moved around, and goo pulled out and stuff put in, and it was a thing. Producer Stanton actually, because up until very recently, the only man I could, thank you for saying that, I'm very well, thank you, Donald. Up until very recently, since May of last year when I broke my arm. So I'm going to give you a sidebar, and I'm not going to digress terribly, but May of last year, I can't believe how time passes. 2 years ago, Memorial Day weekend, my mother's birthday is May 30th. I took her on a cruise on the world's largest cruise ship. And to make it very special, because we had to catch a red eye to Florida and then get on the boat, and we were getting on the Allure of the Seas. And it was my mother's 76th birthday, and she was going on the world's largest cruise ship. And she was very excited, and I was very excited. I have a photograph somewhere that I'll forward that we took in front of the car. And Stanton is a good friend of mine, and he loves Tesla, and he has like a bromance going with Elon Musk. I hope he's not offended by me talking about this, but it goes deep. He's got a thing for Elon. And so Stanton has one of those Tesla SUVs with the gull wing doors. And I asked him as a favor to me if he would drive my mother and I to the airport in his super fancy car. And my mom, who, was born in New York City, first generation, Nuyorican, worked hard, didn't go to college till she was 34, graduated nursing school, has worked nonstop in her chosen profession. And the reason why I'm telling that part of the story is because I did a Zoom last night. Again, I've worked a lot when I think, oh, I've only done one live show. Yeah, but I've done an audition, a commercial, somebody else's podcast. Like, I've worked more since my surgery, setting up lights. And since I've worked, the 2.5 months before, I've worked very hard and, really mastered the technological part of the pivot. And I had a lovely young man message me after watching me on Zoom and say, I worked 20 years on Wall Street and I quit, prior to COVID even, to pursue my dream of being a stand-up comedian full time. And you inspired me. He said some very nice things. I don't need to sit here and blow my own horn. They were lovely and heartfelt. And I felt a little bit like Baloo the bear in the Jungle Book when he's pretending to be dead and they're, eulogizing him and saying beautiful things. Even Bagheera the panther is giving him all the love. And, Baloo's like, I don't even want to sit up. This is going so well. So it was one of those moments. And I responded to him. And I think I'm going to tweet it because I like the way it sounded and it kind of rhymed. And I said, always, always, always do what you must. Because there will be a cubicle, a desk, a cosmetic counter, there will be something waiting. It will always be there if your must is a bust. And the reality is, if you put everything into it, I don't know anybody whose must was ever a bust. I just don't. Everybody that I've ever met who decided to change careers or follow their passion, or maybe later in life they went back to school after a divorce or when their children are grown or whatever they've done, I've never known a soul whose must was a bust. Because definition of a must is that it's a must. Failure is not an option. So my mother, and I didn't even know that I was going to tell this story, but sometimes I sit and I prepare material for this show, and then the show says, we're not going in that direction. And something inside of me hijacks my material and takes me where it's supposed to go. And if anybody who's seen me perform live knows that happens in my comedy as well. So maybe there's somebody out there that needs to hear this. But my parents married each other twice, and I don't even know how that works. That's like if you go back to the car lot and say, like, I know that the hoses are loose and the speedometer's been turned back and this car, makes a lot of noise, but hey, it's mine. I'm used to it. I'll buy it back. Like, I don't even get that, but it's not terribly uncommon, I guess, that people marry twice. Okay. But my parents married each other twice. And I think the second time was out of Catholic guilt because my brothers were particularly challenged by the divorce. And I say that, and even as it came out of my mouth, maybe I was more challenged than I thought, but I was secretly and privately challenged. I've always been the kind of person that just sucks it up and does what I have to do. But my brothers are more, I'm the girl, but my brothers are more emotional, and my brother JC is particularly emotional. When he was a little boy, they used to call him Juan Carlos, is JC, Juan Carlos Lloroncito, which means crybaby, like La Llorona. He was Lloroncito because he was very, very sensitive. He cried as a child. And part of it is because he's brilliant and super sensitive and, takes on a lot of emotion. So he's kind of a sponge that way. So maybe he felt a sorrow in the house, because I do believe, and even Freud and even Carl Jung believe in the collective unconscious. So maybe there was a collective energy of sorrow and failure in our house that my brother absorbed that was affecting him far more than me. And so that being said, And there's so many more stories, but my parents remarried and it didn't go any better the second time. In fact, I think it went worse. I'm sure it went worse. But because my mother had kind of been to that rodeo and had gotten a little stronger and a little tougher, and maybe that's what the whole thing was about, she wanted to be a nurse. My mother always wanted to be a nurse. She had a passion. In fact, I think my mother would have been happy being a nun slash nurse in a Catholic hospital. She's a very chaste and decent and kind person, and she's just like that. Like, there's a purity to my mom that if she didn't have at least one child that looked like her, because me and my brother JC look like my dad, but Willie looks like my mom, I would have thought she was a virgin and stole us from street people. But the long story is that there was a line in the sand because Latino people culturally, and it's a new thing that it's changing, but within cultures, certain cultures, being a nurse is considered not a great profession because part of your job is that you have to see people's junk. You know, like as a nurse, sometimes you have to take a sponge to a grown man's, you know, wrinkly parts. And you don't get to pick and say, well, I'm married, I'm only going to sponge bath ladies. But it's not like James Caviezel, who tells producers, I'm not going to do love scenes. And, you know, he's been in Person of Interest and Passion of the Christ and Count of Monte Cristo. And I think that's pretty much the only times I've seen James Caviezel, which is sad because he's an amazing actor. And his version of the Count of Monte Cristo is my favorite. But now I have a digression on top of a digression. So let me back away from Jim Caviezel and what he's able to put in his rider and say that as a nurse, you're just a nurse. You stick hoses up people's butt when they have blocked bowels, and if you have a dude, you sponge bath him, and if he's a pervert, he might feel tumescence, even if he's not a pervert, just because you're a lady with warm water on his tender parts. So, you know, my mom really wanted to be a nurse, and her family was very much against it. And then she married my dad, and years passed, and when she was 34 years old, and they got divorced the second time, actually 33, because my mom and I are exactly 20 years apart, my father said, well, you can't be a nurse. And my mother said, well, I want to be a nurse. Like, you've gotten to do everything you've wanted, and I have forgiven all your transgressions. And I can say them because he's not here. And if he's looking down from heaven, he's not Carlos E. Marvez anymore. And whatever he is would be smiling. But my dad was a piece of work. Like, my dad would cheat on his cheats with cheats. Like, he was the Latino Don Draper. Like, the phone would ring and his mistress would say, like, you know, you need to talk to your dad. I think he's cheating on me. And I would say, well, I'll get back to you, Alicia, but I'm helping my mother, his wife, my mother, cook dinner. So I'll get back to you on that. He's cheating on his mistress thing whenever I'm done. And by the way, I'm 9. I don't think this is appropriate. And I wish everything I'm saying is a joke. But if you think that you're the only person that has weird things in your life or has had inappropriate conversations or has things that are a little lowbrow, no, you're not. It's the nature of humans. Everybody's had weirdness. You know, it's just degrees of weirdness and the degrees of weirdness you're willing to share. But my father drew a line in the sand. And my mom and I, even back then, were never bestest buddies. And I'm a daddy's girl. And even now, I can look into this camera after I've told you everything I've just told you and said that my dad was, you know, flawlessly flawed. And whatever issues he had with my mother were with my mother. They weren't with me. And I didn't love him any less, even though I knew that he could have been a better man. And as long as I'm telling you this story, I'm going to jump in the Wayback Machine to talk about weight. So I'm going to put a pin in that, and I'm going to ask producer Stanton that if I don't get back to it, Stanton, just, you know, type on the screen weight. Okay. So WEIGHT, not WAIT, but they're actually the same thing. Waiting and Waiting is one of the chapters in my book and a scene in my one-woman show. So, okay, I've got producer Stanton to remind me, and my friend Cindy's on the couch, and she can always kind of wave her arm and say, go back to that part that you didn't talk about. So, so that being said, there are moments that transcend your own psychology and your own prejudices, and maybe it speaks to the bigger, better part of you. And my mother said, I'm going to be a nurse, Monique, and I don't care, what your father says. if it were my Aunt Candy, she would say, I'm going to be a nurse and I don't care if it hair lips the Pope, because that's how my Aunt Candy talks. She's extremely colorful. She says things when we were children like, the next sound you're going to hear is your teeth on the floor, you know, and we were afraid of Aunt Candy because she would make good. Like, she wouldn't knock anybody's teeth out, but Aunt Candy would make good with an ass whooping. And mostly she, like, her threats were so colorful that you weren't going to take a chance on her making good on them because they were extremely colorful. So my mother said, I'm going to be a nurse. And one of the proudest days of my life, and I'm not even sure, you know, at that time that I fully took in the good example that my mother was setting for me, but I knew some tectonic shift in my mother's life that she was, you know, because this was 1975, 75. And I know that because it was that weird year. My parents filed for divorce on my 13th birthday. And it's that weird time when you're in between being a little girl and being an adult, and maybe you've gone through puberty, or maybe you're stuck in the middle and you have a face full of zits. But on my 13th birthday, my parents went to court to file for divorce. And my gifts were Carole King tapestry on vinyl, and a skirt, and a Holly Hobby t-shirt that had Holly Hobby with an actual real braid, like the stuff you would buy at Cracker Barrel, but there wasn't Cracker Barrel yet. But I had like a little girl's Holly Hobby shirt with buttons and calico and a real braid, and Carole King, which, if you think about that album, It's Too Late Baby, So Far Away, Smackwater Jack. I mean, the words to Smackwater Jack, you can't talk to a man with a shotgun in his hand, like, genius. Or even So Far Away, doesn't anybody stay in one place anymore? It would be so fine to see your face at my door. Like, what? And the flutes, I'm not usually a flute person, but the flutes at the end of So Far Away, bone crushing, bone crushing. And of course, stayed in bed all morning just to pass the time. Ugh, ugh. Even as a child, I knew that's not a good plan. So that's what I got for my 13th birthday. My parents filed for divorce. I got Carole King and a Holly Hobby t-shirt. And my mother asked me, and maybe she needed support, or maybe she needed to know that I wasn't just Team Carlos. I don't know. But she asked me if I would go down to Miami-Dade Community College, which was, and is, I think, the biggest junior college in the United States. And at that time, it had a full nursing program. I can picture it. I can close my eyes and picture us standing in line while my mother filled out paperwork and brought out her, 15, 16, 17-year diploma from St. Michael's Catholic School, and took the first step. The first little baby step towards a career that just ended 1 month ago at 78 years old. Just shy of a day before my mother's 78th birthday, she retired from sitting on the board of nursing for the state of California. So as you can see, that went extremely well. And so I remember standing in line with my mother as she filled out that paperwork, and knowing that it wasn't going to go well, that this was it, that my dad had drawn a line in the sand, and my mother had basically stepped over it and stuck a thermometer, up his butt and a stethoscope in her ear so she wouldn't hear it. And that was that. And that was that. And, life changed dramatically. And now I'm going to go back to the waiting part, because here's the funny part. I was a very normal child. And when I say that, I mean, I was normal weight. I was like a little bit chunky, but not fat. And I was athletic. I was the fastest runner in the second grade at Scott Lake Elementary School, and girl runner. But I could run very fast in second grade. And in fourth grade, when my parents separated the first time, I was that thing whatever it is before you're aware of sexy, when you don't know what that is, but you're self-confident. I was that. I was fit, and I ran, and I rode my bike, and I was suntan, and my teeth were white, and I had shiny hair that was mostly red with blondish streaks because I was always outside, and I felt so good about myself. I had sublimated some things, you know. When I was a little girl, my dad would use me as an excuse to get out of the house. And, somehow we would always run into this lady that worked at his office. Like, what a coincidence that your super hot secretary always shows up wherever we go, whenever take me to the movies, when we're supposed to have father-daughter time, your super hot secretary shows up. And here's what's funny about that. I always tell people you can't take the pounds off until you take the weight off. And the first weight, the first pounds, the first obligations, the first secrets, the first wetting of the sponge of my soul was that somehow I knew that the super hot secretary showing up places wasn't right. And even though they never did anything in front of me, except sit in the movie theater, they might have been holding hands, but I didn't see it. I was very smart. Who knows what they did when I went to the bathroom, or when they gave me money 3 times to buy popcorn and Jordan almonds, or, I don't know. But here's the funny part. I knew not to tell my mother. My father never told me, not one time, don't tell your mom we ran into, fill in the blank. She might still be alive. And somehow, in my little girl brain, I knew not to say anything. Like, for sure, he probably had an alibi all lined up. Like, oh my goodness, what are the chances we'd run into Hot Chick? And there she was. And, I invited her to sit with, I'm sure that in his Don Draper charming butterwood and melt in his mouth, that he felt like he had an alibi, and that it was probably more dangerous to tell me not to, because then it'd be on my mind but I never did. I never did. And the back end of that story is that, many years later, and you can't forgive somebody, fully and completely when you think they don't think they did anything wrong. I have forgiven many, many, many people transgressions that never asked me to, that didn't even acknowledge the wrong, just for my own sake. But when I was about 18 years old, my father and I were driving on I-95 in Miami. He had a yellow Firebird. My dad liked Pontiacs. He had a Firebird. He had a Trans Am, just like the one in Smokey and the Bandit. So he had this yellow Firebird, and we were driving on I-95, and I said, whatever happened to fill in the blank hot chick secretary? And he said, you remember that? Because I was a little girl, like it started when I was very little. I go, yeah. She had black curly hair, and, she had false, it was the 70s, false eyelashes. She was like the anti my mom. She was the photo negative. She was a super glam. Like, my mom is very fair and a little bit chunky and has big blue eyes. She's very pretty. She was beautiful, and she was young, and she's still pretty. She's a very happening old lady, if anybody's, she's single. But my mom, this woman was the photo negative of my mother. She was a tall, slim, sophisticated, big boobed. She looked like a Playboy bunny. She was what people would call in the 70s flashy. She was flashy. So I asked my dad, whatever happened to Flashy? And he said, you remember that? I said, sure. I remember when she met us, when we went to see Fiddler on the Roof. I remember when she met us at the fair. I remember when she met us. And he almost wrecked the car. And he pulled over. I'll never forget it. He pulled over. Miami's very hot and sunny, at the first underpass on I-95 by the 836 exchange, up near where you can either go left or catch the turnpike north. And he pulled under the underpass, and he leaned on the steering wheel and sobbed. uncontrollably for a very long time. And he said, I can't believe you remember that. And I'm so ashamed of myself. I'm so ashamed that I exposed you to that. I'm so ashamed that I took you with me and that you probably have put the dots together. And I'm begging for you to forgive me. Well, I had already forgiven him, of course. And the peculiar thing is that, you know, when you ask somebody with all the contrition in your heart to forgive you a trespass, if they don't forgive you, it's on them. I've never in my life witnessed a more contrite confession and desire for forgiveness in my life until about 3 years ago, when my mother, maybe 4 at this point, when my mother did it about another incident. But that's for another day. So oddly enough, you know, when I sort of took on the weight, I say that my parents remarried each other twice because my brothers weren't doing well. But if I'm perfectly candid, between 4th grade, thinking, you know, I was all that and I was popular and I was not the fastest girl in 4th grade, but I was still pretty fast. I mean, it wasn't my all-time high of 2nd grade, but I was still athletic and I still rode my bike until dark and etc. I put on about 35 pounds. By the time I was in 6th grade, I was obese. I know this because I joined Weight Watchers with my mom and my aunt when I was in 6th grade. And they used to give you like this little fatty passport where you would get this little book where you would go and they'd put a stamp on it that you showed up to your class. You get your little fatty stamp. And then they would weigh you. And one of the tricks was that one week you could wear like jeans and a belt, and then the next week wear a dress, and it would automatically look like you lost weight because, you know, you rigged it. But, you know, they tell you to wear the same dress or something similar every week so you can compare. But I took on weight, and then I took on pounds. And by the time my parents got divorced the second time, I was 140 pounds of 7th grader that had flunked out of Weight Watchers. I didn't really flunk out. I just decided they had nothing to offer me in that group. But anyway, I want to talk about these things because, you know, when I say that if you have a must, you know, COVID has allowed me to expand on my must. I've been a comedian and I've been an air talent and I've written for TV, but I kind of, you know, froze. And it's a little bit like comedians that don't write new material that have to explain the joke because they're too lazy to write a new one. So they go like, a long time ago, there was a woman named Lorena Bobbitt. Well, if you have to tell the news story to get current to tell the joke, and although my material is fresh and I'm relevant and my radio show was good, I really was just witness protection comedian. I was so resistant to the other things. And because I was resistant, we always hate in others what we ourselves are either not good at or we know is a problem. So I had a bad attitude about people that got, you know, YouTube videos that went viral and suddenly they were getting booked on the strength of a YouTube video. To be perfectly candid, more than once I've shrugged and said like, Angela Johnson, Korean nail lady. And then you know what? I met Angela Johnson at the Ha Festival. She's super nice and I felt terrible. And we're actually, you know, we're not like friends. We don't hang out, but we're friends. And we've got some pictures together and we texted and we talked about writing and process. And she was the opposite of me. She'd never seen me do stand-up, didn't know who I was. she's a big star and I'm somebody who's been in the game a long time, but because I never embraced social media and made it good rather than, be honest with myself and say, why are you drinking the haterade when it comes to Angela Johnson? Like, that's just you slurping the haterade because a talented girl who's attractive, who worked very hard to be a good dancer and was a Lakers girl, pivoted and used her looks and her skills and her talents and her smarts and did, a bit that went well. Like, don't like put the haterade down, stop slurping, and get your own life going. And she was the hostess for the HBO Max comedy show that was at the Ha Festival, Latino Comedy Festival, that's going to air sometime next month. And when she saw me do stand up, had never seen me, didn't know me from Adam's House Cat, but I had a very good set. She unabashedly let me know that she was an instant fan and that she thought I was hilarious and talented. And unlike my father, I didn't have the courage to say, I owe you an apology for drinking the haterade on you being super successful as a YouTube comedian. And so I know she's not watching this, but it makes me feel better to say it out loud to you guys. And but that was my bad. My bad was not embracing social media, not learning how to, make little videos for IGTV or, whatever, like any of it. And then COVID was what I call the Brooklyn Angel. The Brooklyn Angel isn't the one that comes down with wings and a harp and says, la, 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 this is what you should do. The Brooklyn Angel sneaks up behind you and hits you with a baseball bat. It kind of Tanya Hardings you or Jeff Gillooly, but it doesn't let you see it coming. Like, it gets you and like whacks you in the back, And I'm going to talk a little bit about one of my favorite Florence and the Machine songs in a minute. But it like whacked me, and COVID like came up behind me and went, bam, learn social media and quit being a baby. Wham, it's not as hard as you think. Just take a baby step. Wham, remember your mother standing at Miami-Dade Junior College knowing that, that her marriage was going to end and she was going to disappoint her parents and she was going to have to wipe old people's, half-dead junk. Wham, and then I was like, all right, and that's how the 330 got started. And that's how my YouTube, and this is how this got started. Because the Brooklyn Angel, because COVID whacked me. So that's why I want to talk about being stuck and how everything is an answer to a prayer and how hard I've worked. And I've done many Zoom comedy shows at this point and some corporate shows. And I've self-taped for a series, and I've done an audition for a television commercial that I got news on Tuesday morning. They liked the audition and they've passed it on to the client. So, the Brooklyn Angel did me no harm. And I'm saying that because sometimes that's what you need is a whack to move forward. Like, the time for sweet talk and heart is maybe past you. And, one of the stories that stuck to me this week, and the reason why I got thinking about this was because, and this is a weird story and it's a weird segue, but Mary Kay Letourneau died at 58 years old. The ex-teacher that gained notoriety after she was jailed for sexually abusing her student and then later marrying him. She was charged with raping 12-year-old student Vili Falau. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing his name. But this story started in the late 90s. I remember it, and I followed it. She got out of jail. She was forbidden to see him. She met with him in a car. She got pregnant again. She went back to jail for parole violation. And she had been married with 4 children. Now, I don't know what happened to Mary Kay Letourneau. I know that there's some weirdness in her childhood. I actually researched her. But I remember having, some comedy bits about her in the late 90s because I used to do a lot more pop culture news related comedy. Sometimes I still do, but it's mostly relationship now. But Mary Kay Letourneau was a bizarro story about somebody who was frozen about somebody who didn't see themselves or their age or why something was inappropriate. They just had an emotion, and it was like a very low vibration, like an amoeba stimulus response. And whatever she saw in this child that made her, before she even had him as a full-time student, she had bought him some art supplies because he was evidently a talented artist. And with the least amount of judgment that I could put forth in this story, you know, the odd thing is that in April, I had sent myself a story to talk about on this podcast, on this live stream, about how Mary Kay Letourneau, and he had filed for divorce, Billy, and they were supposedly getting divorced. And the story I pulled was that she was ready to date an age-appropriate man. And as that being a bit in my act, and you know, me sort of like, you think I'm bad, like check her out. You know, I was going to make, you know, a joke about it. But the funny thing is that they were separated. He filed for divorce. I think that he drew a line in the sand emotionally and spiritually, that he meant it this time, that his life had changed. I don't know if he already had moved on or if he had a girlfriend. I haven't dug that deep into the story. But whatever her identity was, her identity for the last 20 plus years has been, you know, child rapist. And maybe she felt like she made it right by marrying him, and they were, you know, not on again, off again, but they had some issues. And she was, you know, the mother of his children, even though she had 4 other kids prior to even knowing him. But what was interesting to me about the story was that she got sick, colon cancer, I had to look it up, and died very quickly. And the divorce was never final, and Billy was by her side when she died. And what I thought was that whatever her psychological components were that stuck her in this weird arrested adolescent of not genuinely being able to see herself and her life in any sort of objective way, she died without ever knowing anything different. Like, she died married to her victim / paramour / father of her children / potentially love of her life / lots, very complicated, psychologically enmeshed Freudian spaghetti bowl. But my point is, she got sick and died. And I do believe that all illness begins with a thought or lack of a thought in the invisible. And then we call it down from that realm. And I think that there was a part of her that was unable to grasp a different identity than that 20 plus year long identity, which was very visible, which gave her a lot of attention and notoriety. Every move she made. I mean, look, the fact that they were separated made the news. The fact that she wanted to date age appropriate made the news. When they got married, it made the news. When she went back to jail, that's a lot of attention. And attention is still currency, positive or negative. Attention is still currency. It's still energy. It's still all eyes on me. And prior to social media, that, you know, news, tabloids was big doings. And in fact, speaking of identity, somebody tweeted, a comedian said, like, go ahead and make all your mistakes in your 20s, because, you know, you'll outgrow them, you'll forget, nobody will remember. And Monica Lewinsky retweeted that quote and just wrote, which made me really like Monica Lewinsky, because she was 22 and we've never forgotten her. Her name is synonymous with HJ, you know? So, BJ, sorry. It was a J. There was probably a HJ too, but mostly we know about the BJ. So, you know, I thought about how I've learned social media on COVID's watch. I'm building a very big grown up, put on your big girl pants website with a website builder in England who I like very much. And, it's like big girl, like when you guys come to it, because I had to actually reframe the whole thing philosophically. Because when we started talking, when I said, all right, I'm home, I have time to do this, I was still talking in terms of, come see me at this comedy club. Here are my bookings. Here are my tour dates. Well, guess what? I couldn't tell you what I'm doing. I know I've got some Zoom shows that I'll post, and I've got some cruises booked starting October 28th if they go off. Everything's been canceled till then. I know I'm in Colorado Springs. That's their grand reopening, Looney's Comedy Club, a club I've been going to for 25 years. I know I'm at Looney's on Academy in Colorado Springs, July 31st and August 1st. I know that, and that'll be on my new website. But I had to have a philosophical shift about content creation and what a website is, and that it's the nexus of all things Monique, and that when you guys, when I air on HBO and you go to MoniqueMarvez.com, then all of a sudden it's like, check out my Insta. And I'm going to have like big girl Insta. Like Stant and I are learning to do small videos for IGTV and how to edit my comedy into little things. And, and everything I'm doing now just feels, I've coined the term pandolescent, but I feel pandolescent. I feel young. Because when I started comedy, I didn't know if I was going to get booked, and I didn't know how to find the clubs. And it was before there was Yelp, or the Thomas Guide was what I used. Like, you had paper maps. I remember having big Rand McNally maps in my car so that I could find Stanford and Sons in Kansas City. And that I knew that in Timmins Corner, Alabama, was a fantastic barbecue place called Dick Russell's, which I looked up on the internet, and it's still there. I don't eat meat anymore, but their sides were good, so I think I would still go there. And how much I loved the experience of jumping into the unknown, of embracing my must, of quitting my day job, of driving around and meeting people, and and just going places, and working with other comedians, and hanging out in the comedy condo, because it's the only job where, by merit of the fact that you have the same job, in order to save money on hotel rooms and have it be a tax write-off, comedy clubs would buy a house or a condo, and the headliner stayed in the main room, the master suite, and the middle act stayed in the second room. And sometimes, usually they book an opener that was a local, but sometimes the middle and the opener would make friends, and the opener knew where to get weed. And as the headliner, I'd be locked in the master bedroom all week because, the middle, I was a woman, and there were very few women road dog headliners, and you'd have like the middle act and the local opener smoking weed and watching Skinamax, and that was my life, was like dodging dodgy comedians. And I have stories like you wouldn't believe, including my dog, Vinny Moscatelli. One time I opened the door at the Tucson Comedy Condo, which was a nice house in Tucson, Arizona. I was working a comedy club there owned by a guy named Gary Bynum. And the middle act was outside like he stalked me. Like I could see the shadow of his feet under the door, and my dog would bark and bark. And just because I knew he was there, one day I just flung the door open, and my dog sprung up and just bit him in the crotch really hard. And he's like, your dog bit me. And I'm like, what are you doing standing outside my door all the time? Like I don't even care. And he's had his rabies shot. And for the record, the bite was a warning. Next time I'm going to probably do something worse. I've heard stories of people pulling, female comedians pulling handguns on people. And by the way, I'm not going to mention any names. Pia Vidal. But anyway, I've heard. I wasn't there. So that being said, I feel like I have a new must now. And my new must is to get fully prepared for whatever goodness the universe rains down on me when my, HBO Max special with my new friend Angela Johnson as the hostess airs And I want to talk to you about waiting, because COVID has created a lot of waiting, WAITING. And we're all wondering, when are comedy clubs going to open? When are cruise ships going to be back on the sea with us entertaining? And unfortunately, when you're in a holding pattern and you're an emotional eater or you're nervous, then that can add to the weight, WEIGHT, which adds to the pounds. And I'm encouraging all of you not to wait for something to happen. Create your own mini must. If there was something you always wanted to do, take this pause for the cause to learn a new language, or do Zumba, off of Pinterest. Like, there's all kinds of free stuff being offered because of this. I want to take tango lessons. I don't have time right now because I'm embracing social media. But if I wasn't pivoting to not be a baby about social media, I would maybe take, like, by myself with a broomstick tango lessons. Whatever. I would practice my French. I took French in high school, and it's similar to Spanish. So I was very excited that the times I've been to Paris, I could, say, Je m'appelle Monique, et vous? And thank you, Martina said my hair's cute. I put my braid on. It's my Saturday night spiffy braid. And it was funny because the first time I went to Paris, I went with, at that time, the fella in my life. And qu'est-ce que c'est means, what is that? And it got to be like a thing, like he'd say, go qu'est-ce que c'est then, meaning like ask them, what this is or what that, go qu'est-ce que c'est then. And but I remember taking French lab in Miami, and you put the little headsets on and go beep, and then they would say something, and then you would say something, and I would be like, they'd have a conversation. Like, if you want to say, I always miss the end of a television show, you would, but I always miss the end. Mais nous manquons toujours la fin. I always miss the end. And they would say, like, où est Monique, which is, where is Monique? And Monique est devant le stade, which is Monique was behind the stadium. And I didn't like that because it hit too close to the home of me being a little bit of a makeout queen. But yeah, I learned, like, I remembered so much when I was in Paris, and it made me very proud that I could care. And because I speak Spanish, my pronunciation is pretty decent. So then people just go off to the races. Like when I say, je m'appelle Monique, or comment allez-vous, très bien, merci, et vous? And then they're like, and I go, no, je parle un peu, je comprends, je ne parle. Like, I understand, I don't speak. But I would be doing a lot more French if I wasn't building a website and learning how to Zoom and researching IGTV and finding out how to be pithy on Twitter and use Twitter as a way to bring you guys to the mothership, which is here, and my 3:30s on Facebook Live, and I'm excited, and I'm unstuck, and I'm pandolescent. I'm feeling, in fact, I haven't gained an ounce. I promised myself at the very beginning of this 3 things. I wasn't going to gain any weight. I wasn't going to shop online, and I wasn't going to give in to the devil of despair. Well, to be perfectly candid, I have done a little shopping online, but in all fairness, it was my mother who gave me the crack, because my mother doesn't know how to navigate the internet machine very well. And when she retired, May 29th, Friday, May 29th, my mother retired, she got a bunch of Amazon gift cards. So she said, I'll just give you the Amazon gift cards to use because I don't know how to order stuff on Amazon, and you have an Amazon account. So after, not only did my mother turn her must into a lifelong passion, but she stuck the landing. Like, her retirement was a very big deal. I mean, she retired from the board of nursing for the state of California, and she got all kinds of gift baskets and special little cookies and wine, and it was, she brought all the stuff down to take care of me after my surgery. I still have fancy spreadable Gouda cheese. Like, when would I have that in my house if my mom didn't get a super swanky gift basket? But she gave me all her Amazon gift cards. And once I ordered a certain pair of yoga pants that made my butt look really good, it was a little bit on, it was a little bit on. But to my credit, I haven't gone bananas, and I've only bought a handful of things. And now I'm going to wean myself off of, and I'm talking about, not spent a lot of money. I guess that's all relative. I'm going to stop talking about this now because I'm starting to feel like an addict. You know how people that drink too much never call it booze or alcohol or liquor. They say adult beverages, or let's have some cocktails. Like, I feel like that. I feel like I'm justifying that I'm chugging a big old jug of Amazon Wild Turkey. So let me just move on from that conversation and just say that I don't want you to WEIGHT. I don't want you to add weight and burden yourself with trying to figure out what's going to happen, because we don't know. None of us know in any state when the spikes are going to end, when, whatever, like how long our immunity will last if you've tested positive. I have a comedian friend who's touring now because he had the COVID, he survived it, and now he's going to tour around Florida calling it the immunity tour. And my friend Dougie Almeida, I did his podcast, and and that's all I can tell you is that I don't know. And it's just like in any other business, you don't know what you don't know. And unfortunately, there's no experts to hire. We can't hire. I mean, we've got Dr. Fauci, and we just have to trust him, and maybe we do and maybe we don't. But nobody knows, because this is the new thing. That's why it's a novel virus. But I do know this, that I'm not stuck, that I'm willing to reinvent myself, that I can start a journey, because nothing's changed. It's biblical. It's Ecclesiastes. To everything there is a season. That to everything turn, and the reality is that the quote, even though we're in our homes, but think of all we have in the virtual world, that a journey of 1,000 years or 1,000,000 countries, or the longest journey starts with a single footstep, I think is the actual quote. I'm paraphrasing. But whatever the journey is, my journey to pivot, my journey to start new, just like the first time I was on radio was very difficult, and now I know how to do radio. And the first time I wrote a pilot script was all new and difficult. And because of what I do, I've been able to master something, and then I've gotten the opportunity to learn something else, and then I've gotten the opportunity to learn something else. And now I'm treating social media just like I treated radio or writing a pilot script. I'm giving it the same gravitas and love and attention, and making it my must. Not because I have to, but because it feels right. Timing is right. I understand the value, because just telling somebody to do something, I've had people pounding me on the head like, "You're so funny. Why aren't you more famous?" Like hitting me on the head like they have little marimba mallets, like ding, 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 ding. Like, you have to, you have to, you have to. And it's not like I'm oppositional. It's just like, it's not my skill set. I just want to write jokes and get free salmon at Hermosa. Ding, 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 ding. Marimba's on my head. And then I'm not the kind of person that does things just because you tell me to. And I never want you to do anything just because I told you to. You have to understand the value of doing something for yourself, why it matters. You have to understand, and it's the rhetorical route. You don't have to do anything, for the record. But me personally, once I could embrace the proper use of social media, which wasn't to record what I ate for dinner or some cute dog antic, and not that there's anything wrong with any of those things, not that there's anything wrong with that. It's just that's not what I chose to show the world. But once the Brooklyn Angels smacked me in the back of the leg, and I started really thinking about all the positive ways that I could use social media, that if I made a decision, like I've said this before, but it bears repeating. I had a friend say, "You know what, Monique, you should get a TED Talk." And then they said, "What would your subject be?" And it wasn't going to be like how to be a comedian or whatever, because I have many musts. But I thought, you know what? If I got a TED Talk, I would talk about proactively waging goodness and what that means. Because if we don't wage goodness, like wage goodness with ferocity, get out there, like put down the haterade jug and really think about who you could ask for forgiveness or forgiving yourself for a mistake you made a long time ago. If we don't proactively wage goodness the way bad people wage badness, and we've all seen during COVID how bad people can wage badness. There's credit card fraud, and there's scams, and there's people taking things that aren't theirs, and it's like this whole thing where you have to have a nest because they call them porch pirates that steal your Amazon deliveries, or God forbid your Postmate. You're waiting for that amazing pad thai, and then a porch pirate takes it. I would probably shoot them. But the point is that, we must make a decision. I say we, the royal we. You don't have to do anything. I will love you unconditionally just because you've been kind enough to give me an hour of your attention. You have paid attention. Paid. There's a reason why people say pay. Because it's currency. It's energy. You've given me something I didn't have, which is your time and attention, which is the most valuable thing. So, that's why when people are not confident or they don't know for sure, they go like, can you please give your attention? Ding, 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 ding. Can you give your attention? And in your mind, you're thinking, no, this is not a charity event. I'm not giving, I've been paid attention by a lot of people on my 330s and on these live streams. They're an hour long, and so many of you have watched them all the way through. I can tell because Stanton looks up the numbers and says, like, people don't turn you off in 3 minutes. And I'm like, only ex-husbands, baby. Everybody else seems to like me. So that being said, you've already filled a bank account of energy that will keep me going with my must. Just like getting paid in a comedy club allowed me to get to the next gig. I didn't make any real money for many years, but the currency, the laughter, the camaraderie, hanging out with the other comics, hugging people, selling t-shirts, whatever I did, filled up my reserve and got me to the next place. We're going to get to a next place, but I'm asking you, I did the Mary Kay Letourneau story because is there an identity that you're not allowing yourself to see yourself beyond that, good or bad? Is there something you're stuck in that could be bigger? That if you allowed yourself to think beyond the boundaries of that relationship or that event or that failure or that loss, that something else good could come to you, that something bigger and better. Like maybe if Mary Kay Letourneau could have seen herself having a life besides Billy, maybe at some point she could have made peace with her original 4 children. And maybe she did. Again, the stories don't cover that. I tried to find out. But maybe there could have been a life with an age-appropriate man, and she was still friendly with Billy, and she, was all good and peas and carrots with her other 4 kids. Like, you don't get to decide. You get to decide how you feel. You get to decide to move forward. You get to decide your attitude. Because I'm going to tell you right now, if you leave it up to the universe, if you leave it up to the matrix, if you leave it up to the grid to pay you back, I promise you that it may not come from the direction that you put the energy and the love. It'll come around behind you. And the very same way that the Brooklyn Angel hit you in the back of the knees, now I'm going to stick the landing with Florence and the Machine. The line in The Dog Days Are Over is happiness hit her like a bullet in the back. Now think about that. Happiness hit her with a force that propelled her forward. She didn't see it coming. It hit her with a force and it propelled her forward. The song "The Dog Days Are Over" by Florence and the Machine is brilliant, but I never really understood how happiness could hit you like a bullet in the back. But it really can. When you least expect it, something can smack into you and propel you forward into a place of joy that you never knew could exist. I hope I've given you a lot to think about. I love you like crazy. And I will see you guys next Saturday night. But please show up 3:30 on Facebook and join our little group. So I'm going to end it the way I always do. Love hard, forgive harder, and get as happy as you can as fast as you can. See you next Saturday, or maybe tomorrow at 3:30. We're going to see each other again very soon.